Hello, everyone. Welcome to our complimentary webinar, From Tension to Teamwork, Resolving Conflicts Together. I am your host, Benji Garcia, President of POWERinU Training and Coaching Philippines. Before I introduce our speaker, let me briefly talk about POWERinU. Anchored in our faith and values, we collaborate to empower individuals and organizations to achieve sustainable results through value-adding consulting solutions. We take pride in our values of customer-centric, change advocates, passionate learners, and entrepreneurial leaders. We are a consulting, training, and coaching company with established global partners, and we offer the knowledge, expertise, and experience of a team of internationally certified high-caliber trainers, consultants, and coaches with experience in various industries across Asia Pacific. We have served numerous clients in the past 8 years since we started operating, and we have been offering complimentary webinars such as this since 2019. So this year is our fifth year, of running these webinars. But enough of POWERinU. Let me now introduce to you our speaker for this webinar. Driven by her mission, which is to discover, develop, maximize, and share the power within you, Elaine founded POWERinU Training and Coaching LLP in Singapore back in March 2008. Prior to that, Elaine served in various senior and regional leadership roles in multinational corporations for 20 years, where she specialized in sales, business management, and regional general management. Her last corporate stint was as general manager for ASEAN cluster of Kodak Health Group, which became Carestream Health. Elaine then embarked on a second career in training, consulting, and coaching in Singapore, where she has been based for the past 24 years. A values-driven leader, Elaine co-founded POWERinU Training and Coaching Philippines Incorporated back in 2015, with partners based in the Philippines who share the same mission and values. She currently serves as an active director in both POWERinU Singapore and Philippines. Elaine is a globally certified leader and management trainer, certified practicing management consultant, certified executive coach, and NLP practitioner. She holds a bachelor's degree in applied economics and a master's degree in business administration. She collaborates with global partners such as UKCE of the UK, News Navigation, and MLB, both of Switzerland, and Segos APAC as orchestrator, facilitator, program designer, and executive coach. Now, some of the organizations she has served include such companies and organizations like the World Bank Group, DHL, Visa, Unilever, Eastern Telecom, which you saw a while ago, Coca-Cola Company, which you also saw a while ago, and many others. And I'll stop there, otherwise we will run out of time for the actual webinar. So without further ado, let me welcome our speaker for this webinar, Elaine Cercado.
Thank you, Benji. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to today's or tonight's complimentary webinar. It's my honor and privilege to be your presenter and hopefully to be able to engage with you tonight with the topic From Tension to Teamwork, Resolving Conflicts Together. Now, Benji has already generously shared my profile, but let me also share an introduction about my experience and learnings in conflict management and especially conflict resolution. So I'll just cite a couple of them. And rather than dwell on the left side of what you see on my profile, which Benji has already shared, I want to talk about two conflict situations where I have learned key things, key insights that have helped me with regard to this topic of conflict resolution. In 2006 to 7, Kodak Health Group, where I was acting as the ASEAN General Manager, was sold globally. The headquarters was in the US. And I had to lead the transition of businesses within Southeast Asia from Kodak Health Group to Carestream Health in 4 countries specifically, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand. And for a company whose average tenure was 15 to 20 years, there were feelings of fear and uncertainty about future, about what's going to happen to my job and to my future, which led to resistance. And so I experienced firsthand to manage key stakeholders, deal with fears, deal with resistance, and resolve areas of concern with the transition team and with the country team leads and country team members. So one of my key learnings was no one size fits all. Our universal employee contract at the time, drafted by our headquarters in the US, did not achieve the desired outcome right away. What was key was listening, empathizing with every member of the organization, communicating continuously from phase 0 to even after the transition, and adjusting to meet the various needs and interests that would align to the overall organizational goal. And so it was a very, very main point, to be able to do all of this, what I would say, power soft skills, aside from, of course, the technical aspect of conflict resolution. And in 2014 to 2015, another experience that I'd like to highlight was when in Singapore, where I'm based at, my family went into a food retail franchise business in one of the busiest malls in Singapore. So we launched it, we operated it, and we closed it as well. One of my realization was that despite very good intentions and very good relationship that we had with our business partner, and a written agreement, that actually spelled out all our guidelines and our rules of engagement, it was challenging to operate and achieve goals and sustain the business when there were conflicting principles and ways of working that were not resolved. Hence, to stay together, what I wrote here as my learning, treat it like a business, not just a business, but a life partnership and marriage. It's like reciprocity without accounting, so it's really a commitment. So for this 1 hour or less now, I'd like to impart my wisdom as well, my experiences, aside from all the key teaching points that I will deliver tonight to help you resolve conflicts in the workplace and even in your personal and life relationships. And so for tonight, these are the key learning outcomes that we'd like to accomplish. Understand the link between emotions and conflict, and have ways or learn ways to manage our emotions, because this will help reduce conflict. Number 2, discover 3 basic premises of the competency of conflict management, or you might call it basic principles. Number 3 is to learn to identify the sources of conflict. Very important for you to be able to strategize ways to resolve various types of conflict in the workplace, which can also help resolve conflicts in life in general. Before we go into the first topic, I'd like you to actually go into this Mentimeter. What comes to your mind when you hear the word conflict? And you will find the link on the chat box And also you can actually scan the QR code on the screen right now. So if you can just do that while Trina, our POWERinU person here supporting us for every webinar will switch now to the Mentimeter screen so that we can see what you have put. So let's give it a few seconds. Hopefully you can access the Mentimeter. Another way, just in case you cannot, is to type again on the chat what comes to your mind when you hear the word conflict. So we just want to get a sense of how you understand or what you understand or how you see conflict. So Trina, are you able to show? Let me just, okay. I had to switch screen as well. Okay. So we're seeing there a big word, misunderstanding, disagreement, misalignment, arguments, attrition, interesting, problem, compromise, issue, chaos, no agreement, struggles, challenge, stress. May we ask everyone to go on mute first, please? And what else? Challenge is another. Discomfort, I see there. Compromise. There are about 30 of us right now that I see in the participant. And so there could probably be more. But let me now shift to the next page. And again, you could see here the diversity of definitions and context of conflict. Now, let me just shift back to very interesting. Okay, so I hope you are now seeing my screen again. Okay. So with that in mind, with those that you have written as conflict, let us now look into how, how can we resolve conflict? And there's no wrong answer. There's no one answer. All that you have written are probably correct because it really depends on the situation, your perspective, your context of it. Now, we will find ways how to resolve conflict. But first, let me introduce two persons. We have Alan, person A, and Beth, person B. We'll try to look at the link of emotions and conflict because by understanding the link, we will increase our confidence in managing conflict and difficult emotional conversations. Now, let me introduce the conflict between Alan and Beth. Alan it belongs to, let's say, Department A, and Beth belongs to Department B. Now, Alan's priorities are different from Beth's priorities. And Alan's deliverables, a part of which depend on Beth. And so when Beth doesn't deliver on time, may we ask those who haven't muted to please mute? Okay. So perhaps Trina or some of our POWERinU can help. Okay. So I was saying the departmental priorities of Alan and Beth are different. Alan at some point feels the lack of support from Beth to meet his deliverables. And there have been times when there have been long waiting time for Beth to deliver her inputs, which Alan needs for him to finish his report. So because Beth is late, Alan has less time to finish his report. And so that stresses him. And he feels anxious about that because his performance will depend on that. And so Alan feels upset while Beth is oblivious. So she just goes on as per her usual priorities. Now, the question is, who has a problem? Who has a problem? And so I would like you to answer that question again back to Mentimeter. So hopefully you haven't turned off or closed Mentimeter in your browser. There are two questions you will find there. Who owns the problem and who should initiate the conflict resolution? So think about the situation or scenario that I've just shared with you about Alan and Beth. Department A and Department B. So who owns the problem and who should initiate the conflict resolution? Okay, so you will see two multiple choice. So I'm seeing now some answers. Who owns the problem? 6 persons have said Alan. 1 said Beth. You will have to answer the first question before you can proceed to the second question. So you cannot skip the first question. Okay. And then for the next question, it's who should initiate the conflict resolution. So there's no one who has answered yet. So let's give this 15 to 20 seconds. Now I'm seeing an answer. Who should initiate the conflict resolution? 6 have said Alan. One has said Beth. Okay. So if we go back, Trina, to the first one, who owns the problem? And if you answer, or perhaps, in fact, yeah, who owns the problem? If you answered person A or Alan, you're correct. It is Alan who owns the problem. Okay. And if if you would like to share your why you chose Alan on the chat box, I would welcome that. Second question, who should initiate the conflict resolution? And again, if you answered Alan, you are correct. Okay, so for those who answered Alan, you're correct. And so let us look into that further. Why it is Alan who owns the problem and why Alan should initiate the conflict resolution. Again, if you want to explain further, we'd welcome that. It will be very interesting to also hear from you why you have said that Alan owns the problem. Now, before we go into explaining why Alan and linking it to emotional management in the competency of conflict management, I'd like to remind, and can I just get a confirmation? You can see my slide now.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to remind you about the anatomy of an emotion. I'd like to link it to how our emotions work. An emotion is a signal to take what? Blank. That is why it's called an blank. So another, quiz for you. And so let me give you the answer right away. An emotion is a signal to take action. It triggers when we see something that triggers our emotion. It triggers our brain actually to move us toward taking an action. It's a trigger. I can see here on the chat, Ed, you mentioned action, reaction. Correct. Yeah. So it is a signal to take action or reaction. It's a reaction if we let our emotional brain act on it. Now, a few seconds after that, our thinking brain can actually take over. And so we can have a more emotionally intelligent response. But essentially, that is why it is called an emotion. It sets us, it triggers us to an action. So hence, because the emotion is being felt by Alan, then Alan owns the problem. It's triggering him to act on it. It's that emotion, that upset emotion, triggers him to that action and to that response. Hence, he actually has to initiate the conflict resolution. And that has got to do as well with what we call here the rules of engagement, based on a collaborative approach and democratic style of leadership. The person who is upset owns the problem. Rule number 1. The person who owns the problem solves the problem. Rule number 2. And so, person A, Alan, who was upset, and so he owns the problem and will solve the problem, needs to initiate conflict resolution. Okay? And I see here another input in the chat, which I'd like to read. It is so because Alan is the one who was bothered. Beth is oblivious to the concern and will most likely not initiate the discussion. Yes. And so that is really one of the answers as well. What if it's the wrong problem is the question. Okay. So let's see. Allow me to go through the rest of the presentation. Let's see if we get to answer that, Ed. Now, what are some of the strategies that can help us to manage the emotions? Because it is very important that we manage these emotions first, especially anger, irritation, and defensiveness. Emotional self-management is necessary to avoid defensiveness. Remember here, our goal is to conduct a conflict resolution, not to vent out feelings. So, number 1 strategy that we'd like to mention here is that we focus on the feelings first. We should manage our own emotions, especially these negative emotions of anger, irritation, defensiveness, and others. Have you been in situations at work or even at home, especially with our loved ones or family, where we get so angry, we say or write something that we later regret? I have, and there are things that I sometimes say that I don't mean, but I have sent, something, maybe an email or said a word when I was upset at that point in time. I have regretted them, but I learned a lot from those experiences and I've tried to improve. At home, it's even harder because we are very comfortable with our family members to the point of expressing anger without really thinking about the impact. Anger is a feeling that makes our mouth work faster than our mind. Or as what Ivan Esser has said here, an author, so this is very true. And so how do we handle that? We have to connect with our primary emotions. Anger is usually not helpful in resolving conflicts. It doesn't mean that we deny anger, but instead we use it as a signal, as a trigger to go beneath anger and to connect with what we call our primary emotions. Anger invites defensiveness, But primary emotions invite discussions. Let us consider this image of the iceberg. You know, that iceberg, we only see 10%, and there's that 90% below the water line. And only 10% is visible, while the rest is, of course, invisible. And so it is with anger. It is just the tip of the iceberg. Assessing or going beneath the waterline, assessing our underlying emotion is critically important to managing conflict. And so if I relate to my what I've said earlier, you know, I could have been angry with someone, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. If I have gone into my primary emotion, I might see that I said something or I wrote something because I cared about the person, or because I was hurt, or because there was anxiety, or there was a fear of something. You know, so it is important that these are assessed and that these are uncovered and perhaps discussed with the person. Okay, so that is an important step to do. The other is that we have to focus on impact, not just intentions. Of course, intentions are very important. And, you know, we have to always assume positive intentions. We never really know another person's intentions. So let's try to look also at the impact, and in a workplace context, at the business impact, you know, at the workplace impact. So it is important to look into the person, how the person's behavior is impacting the team, perhaps the customer, the organization, the results, safety, compliance, perhaps in a sales-driven environment, you know, so the sales, the working relationship, the harmony, and so on. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have to assume the most positive intention. No, so it is something that we have to be very conscious or aware about, because sometimes, and again, this is something that is very natural for us. We have the very best of intentions, but awareness of how it might impact another person is something else. And then lastly is, we say, don't wing it, script it. You know, we have this formula, which we would call the XYZ, you know, where we would state a view or a need or a concern. And by doing it in this way, although it might sound a bit robotic in the beginning or unnatural in the beginning, the more that we do it and practice it, the better and natural it becomes. So let me give you an example. And what do we mean really by XYZ? Z or Z, as we call it here in Singapore. X, what happened? What is the situation? Y, what is the primary impact? And the primary emotion or concern with that. And Z is, what is the solution or resolution? And so let me cite an example, you know, where there are, in the case of Alan and Beth, in fact, you know, where there are two persons or two conflicting priorities, deliverables from two departments. You know, I might say, what happened when I didn't receive your inputs last Monday, as we requested for the project we're working out together? I became concerned that we will not meet our deliverables, because that is what we have committed to our stakeholders. So it will impact all our strategic initiatives. So I'd like to revisit our process so we can improve on this. No, and so, of course, there are still follow-up actions to be done. But by stating what happened and what our primary emotion is and our need is, and suggesting a course of action, we're able to express in this manner that is more emotionally intelligent or more managed, you know, in terms of the emotions, and also in terms of eliciting or inviting discussion and inviting a response as well from the other person. Now, the other person can also use XYZ, but in the reverse order, ZYX, to respond, diffuse emotion, and focus on resolution. And so we begin with the Z. So we begin from the bottom, we reverse. This is to respond or to acknowledge, to diffuse the whatever emotion is being felt, and to focus on the action and resolution needed. You know, I might say, if I'm on the receiving end, when you didn't receive our inputs that were due last Monday, because you felt concerned that our department will not meet our deliverables to our stakeholders in this project, you would like us to revisit the process, you know, and the actions moving forward. Okay, so I was able to acknowledge the emotion and also respond to that action. And of course, that might have follow-up discussions as well regarding the specific actions. And so by using XYZ, we can have a more objective, you know, resolution of the conflict, and we can be forward looking and towards the action or resolution needed. So those are three ways or strategies to understand the link between emotions and conflict, and to manage our emotions to reduce the conflict. Now, I'd like to tie that up also to the three basic premises or three basic principles of the competency of conflict management. And so this is for a collaborative environment. This is for a culture where people will help each other to resolve the conflict. Okay, so first premise, your ability to successfully resolve conflicts comes from having access to resources that other people want. Second, relationships matter. And so we build the relationship before we even need it. And third, you must be sincerely willing to yield to agreements, fair arguments, fair principles, and fair procedures. Now, keys here are collaborative, mindset, and culture, learner mindset, growth mindset, and inclusive culture and mindset. And so sometimes that is the challenge, right? In this webinar, we'll not be able to tackle all of these challenges, but I do hope that we're able to, at least with the given time that we have, talk about specific strategies and ways on how to reduce the conflict, you know, starting with how we manage ourselves, and also with some of these ways to manage and resolve the conflict. Okay, so now let's remember this three basic premises, because as we go into the next portions, we will draw on this. And so let's look at this typical scenario of, or example of, a conflict where there are conflicting goals and priorities and varying interests and focus for each department. So I will now go into three departments. So from two, Alan and Beth, you know, we will now go into a, let's say this is manufacturing company, you know, an XYZ manufacturing company. So the problem is that product testing is currently 2 weeks delayed, which will affect product launch date, you know, of 31st of October, for example. Now, Department A, obviously this is something related to engineering, is focused on meeting strict product quality targets, engineering or quality control. Department B is focused on marketing. And so they're focused on designing and implementing marketing campaigns. And Department C is focused on meeting business and sales targets. And so you could see here that each department, although they have one overall goal, they have different priorities, different timelines, perhaps different interests, different resources that they can access, and so this by itself can cause conflict. And if not resolved, then it can lead to bigger issues and even a bigger problem of not meeting this product testing, that is already 2 weeks delayed. Not to mention the relationship, the level of relationship when we go deeper into our workshops in conflict resolutions, we even look into the strength of these relationships, and because these are also keys towards conflict resolution. Okay, so I will now relate this to the next topic of what are then sources of conflict. If you look into this typical scenario, and if I can just engage you and type on the chat box what you think are sources of conflict. Anyone, you could actually type on the chat and perhaps based on this example, what do you see as sources of conflict? I've actually mentioned a few of them already. Schedules are not synchronized. That's true. Differences in opinions, strategies, and priorities. That's right. Thank you. And so if we look at what were the sources of conflict in that scenario and, in possibly in other scenarios as well, different goals and time priorities, right? As what has been mentioned here by Ed. I'm also seeing here different priorities, different ways of working, personalities and learning processes, different focus and goals. And you're all right. So number one, different goals and time priorities. So this is very similar to the situation of Alan and Beth. Number two, overlapping authorities. This is sometimes, a source of conflict, or in many cases, a source of conflict when there are unclear job responsibilities, as it is difficult to define all the job tasks. And so it becomes even more complex when there are overlapping authorities. And this is common, especially for those, bigger and complex organizations, a matrix organization, and when there are organizational changes, organizations who go through many changes and restructurings, and in fact, even there was one in the conflict word cloud, attrition, when there are people leaving the company, of course, then there are it rocks the boat, so to speak, and so authorities, lines of reporting, and job responsibilities become unclear. Another is task interdependence. One example of this is when there are different sets of information that team members can access. And so collaboration becomes difficult. Furthermore, when one person clarifies a particular information, the person receiving that question or clarification might misinterpret it, and might be challenged to answer the question or to provide the information. And so there are different levels of information that they can access, hence different analysis, different perspectives, different takes. And so it actually determines, how well they work with each other. Different evaluation or reward systems. This can happen especially during performance assessment or appraisals when there are varying KPIs, evaluations, and rewards among employees and departments. And sometimes there are misaligned targets, processes, and results, resulting to perceived wrong judgments and unfair evaluations, favoritism, employee dissatisfaction, disengagement, and resistance at different levels. There are misaligned team priorities, miscommunication among teams that happen. And so they impact ultimately the business results. Scarce resources or scarce resources. This is very common, of course. We have limited resources. Most of organizations have, I cannot, even the big companies have very limited resources that they would allocate. And of course, you have to fight it out. And sometimes that can be a source of conflict. And lastly, status inconsistencies. So similar to the others, there are varying context, resources, and also different goals and priorities. And so the progress of one department could be different from the progress of the other department. Okay, so we are down to our last section, and we are down to actually it's yeah, I just looked at the time. Time is fast, so another resource, time. And what I'd like to do now is to share some conflict management strategies. So now that we understand the source of conflict, what are some of the things that we can do? So number one is attack the problem, not the person. In a collaborative environment, it is we all resolve the problem and not the person. We figure out everyone's interests and expectations. We brainstorm for win-win options, and we insist on using fair procedures and principles. Now, in what we will do is focus on number one. And hopefully, in future webinars or in our workshops where you can join, we can look as well in the other steps of the conflict management here in more detail. For now, we will go in a little bit more detail in step one, which is attack the problem, not the person. So for that step, there are 4 important concepts. Assume that there is a win-win solution. Second, we use empathy and open questioning. 3, we identify and write out the problem, and we collaborate to solve the problem. Okay. The first concept here is that emotional upset, as we said, is something we feel that can control, right, our response, our behavior. So this is also actually a trigger that we can use positively. When we feel that emotion, whether it's negative or usually negative, right? When we are upset, we have to actually use that and convert it to something more positive, like curiosity. How can I convert this to become a win-win opportunity? How can I, or what is the opportunity here to solve this problem, to arrive at a win-win solution? That by itself, by developing our emotional intelligence and our self-awareness, we can actually be more mindful. And once we feel that, be triggered to look for a win-win solution. Okay? And so the elegant solution is existing. It's the best solution because it values the diversity of concerns and perspectives that created the conflict in the first place. Because diversity can sometimes be the challenge, but it is actually an opportunity, because in the diversity of these concerns can be a diversity as well of options and solutions. Now, use empathy and open questioning. I'd like you to use the chat and tell me, what do you see in this picture? Burning, Rome burning. It says here from Jane's, burning house on fire. So it seems there's the common thread is burning in a house. Now, what do you see here? So this is a painting actually, and now it gives you a bigger picture, right? So unfinished painting, just lamps and reflections, fancy coffee shop by the river. Wow, right? So the picture becomes very different from a burning house to a fancy coffee shop by the river, a wharf. And so what you see here is a bigger picture. It is similar to the quote, that where we say we see the trees, we should see the forest and not just the trees, right? So the same is true because when we stand too close to our problems, which was the first picture, we have difficult time seeing the way out. When we give or receive empathy, we actually create the distance between the person and the problem, and we're able to see a bigger perspective, a bigger picture. Then from that, we can actually look at the problem and not the person. We can attack the problem and not the person. Now, how do we build that competency of empathy? In the book of Marilee Adams, she said, ask great questions. And so what do we mean by great questions? She actually defined this as having a learner mindset. Now, what do we mean by learner mindset? So we're contrasting this versus a judger mindset. And so for a learner mindset, this type of questions that you see on the left, which is more of a judger question, can be converted actually. These are more of judger questions, but learner questions are different. Can you help me convert? So for example, what's wrong? And I'm going to give you one example. Now, for those in Zoom, I'd like you to type on the chat how you would convert a judger question to a learner question. So one example I'd put here is what's wrong can be actually asked as what works? No, what works rather than what's wrong. And by asking that question, we are actually opening up to a more collaborative approach to probably a conflict that is being resolved. In the interest of time, I will show some of the answers here already, not just the first one, to give you an idea. But of course, these are just suggestions, meaning there are many other ways that you can answer. So who's to blame can actually be, what am I responsible for? Or instead of saying, why are you so difficult? How can I help you? Why are you so incompetent? Have you heard somebody say that? How can I help you be successful? Is a learner type of question. Why bother can be what's possible. And why you like that? Why do you do that? Or why, whatever it is. Why actually can sometimes put the person very off. It can put a person on the spot, and so it can be converted to a what question or a how, so what can I do to help? Or perhaps how can I help you, is another way. Okay, so these are ways to build our competency in our learner mindset. And why are we advocating for learner mindset? Because it is more accepting, more responsive and reflective. It values not knowing. We're more inquisitive, we're more curious. And so we are seeking the input of another person. We're taking responsibility, we're more flexible, and we look at multiple perspectives when we have a learner mindset. And so we're going now to the last two, and that is identify and write out the problem and collaborate to solve the problem. Okay, so identify and write out the problem is very important. By writing out the problem, we externalize it. We symbolically separate the problem from the person or people involved. And so, again, that also signifies that we are not attacking the person, we are attacking the problem, not each other. So we always recommend that we write it out. And then lastly, collaborate to solve the problem. By solving the problem, that means by collaborating, I mean, to solve the problem, that means that we have to identify who are these people that we'd like to collaborate with, whom we would call here the stakeholders. So we have to write all of them and involve them, involve all those whom we need to solve the problem together. And so the first step is to identify the stakeholders. And there is this one way that I would like to use as a method. I'd like to share as a method to solve a problem collaboratively using the 6 thinking hats. And I will now share this. It's my last, I think this is my last 2 slides. This is the video of the 6 thinking hats, which I thought is best to share to explain in 2 minutes what is the 6 thinking hats.
In 1985, a Maltese physician called Edward de Bono published a book called 6 Thinking Hats. The book described a powerful technique for looking at decisions from a number of important perspectives. The premise of the method is that the human brain thinks in a number of distinct ways, which can be deliberately challenged. If you look at a problem with the 6 thinking hats technique, then you will solve it using all approaches. Your decisions will mix ambition, skill, sensitivity, creativity, and good contingency planning. So, how do you use the tool? You can use 6 thinking hats in meetings or on your own. Each thinking hat is a different style of thinking. Let's have a look at what they each mean. When wearing the white hat, you focus on data. Study the information you have on the subject and see what you can learn from it. When you switch to the red hat, you will look at problems using intuition and emotion, sometimes called gut feeling. Try to think how people will react to your decision emotionally. The black hat has you looking at all the bad points of the decision. This is important as it highlights the weak points in your plan. Switch to positive thinking when wearing the yellow hat. This will help you focus on the benefits of the decision and the value in it. This can be really useful when everything looks gloomy and difficult. The green hat is all about creativity. Let the creative juices flow and develop creative solutions to problems. Finally, the blue hat is about process control. When wearing this hat, you decide which hat is the most suitable for the stage of decision making. For example, if ideas are running dry, you may decide to switch to the green hat. By analysing your decision wearing the 6 different hats we've talked about, you can feel confident about your decision knowing you've considered all points of view. In 1985, a Maltese physician called...
So in summary, you have these 6 thinking hats that you can wear actually. So whether it be the white hat to become more objective, the red to wear the hat of emotions and feelings, the black hat to be more pessimistic, the worst scenario. The best scenario is for the yellow hat, the optimistic, the creative hat for the green, and the big picture hat, the strategic thinker hat, So this is very important because then you can see different perspectives. You can see different hats, which helps you in looking at a problem from different ways. And of course, this is something that you can do in a very formal way in your meetings, project team meetings, or in an informal way. Some organizations have done it very creatively, and in fact, perhaps sometimes even have a hat, wear a hat literally, and figuratively. You can also Google it, talk more to learn more about it. But also, of course, in our workshops, we do cover that and have exercises on the 6 thinking hats to practice it. So we have covered various strategies. We have looked at how we manage the emotions, focusing on the feelings, on the impact as well. Aside from the intention, we looked at the script, the XYZ and the ZYX. We also have looked into building our competency of empathy through building our learner mindset through the use of learner questions. And of course, we've looked at the 6 thinking hats. And so with the very brief time that we have covered these key learning outcomes that we have promised you. Now, I'd like you to just type on the chat any key learning or takeaway in one word or one phrase that you have before I hand over back to Benji. And we probably have time for just one or two questions plus the closing announcement. And because we actually started a bit late, I mean, my talk right after the video that we showed earlier, I hope that it's okay for you to extend for a couple of minutes after 8 o'clock. So thank you so much. I hope that you have learned from this 1 hour or less webinar. I'm still very curious. What is your key learning or takeaway? And so just keep writing on the chat, please. Over to you, Benji. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I think we have the lessons learned, and definitely there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the webinar, the inputs that you have shared with us this evening on conflict management, all the way to collaboration, the 6 thinking hats. So a lot of things to absorb, but if we could each take at least one lesson that we can bring back, that would already pay a lot of dividends.
And thank you for those who have written. Yeah, I'm seeing now many who have written phrases, not just words, but phrases. Thank you.
Okay, is it okay to start? Well, maybe some of them are still thinking about
Yes.
their
Yes.
takeaway and question. We did get a lot of initial questions from those who registered, so let's get started. We don't have a lot of time. We probably be able to field 2 questions only.
Yeah.
Okay, one is, I think this relates to conflict management. How do you apply and I'm gonna paraphrase this. How do you apply the principles that you've taught on conflict management in a team that is multi-generational? I think we've talked about multi-generational organizations in previous webinars. So how does this apply? What are the things to keep in mind, Elaine?
Yeah. Thank you for that. And it's a very real, thing that we face now in the workplace and even at homes, right? There are different generations at home. I'll go back to what I talked about, building empathy and building our learner mindset. I think that will really help us deal with the different generations. And if we keep an open mind, as they say, the parachute will not work for its purpose. The mind is like a parachute, right? It will not work if it's not open because the parachute only works when it's open. And so we have to open our minds. We have to build that learner mindset. If you look at how it is, it's really about being curious about the other. It's really about being inquisitive about the other person and opening up our minds to those inputs and perspectives of the other person. And of course, for us to be able to do that, we need to build the empathy. And I think I won't go into the specifics of empathy now, but empathy can really help us bridge the gap between us and the other person, be it from Gen X, Gen Y, and even what is next, Benji, after the Gen X, the
Gen
boomers.
Z.
Yeah, and then of course we
I
have
think
the
there's
Gen
another
Z,
one
the
I
younger.
forgot.
Yeah, and now we have the Gen A, right? So, it's by being empathetic, by not knowing it all, by having a learner mindset are the things that I believe can help us as a first step.
Okay, great. I think we can ask one more question and then we'll have to get going with our announcements and closing. So the second question is, how can diversity of thought and perspective be utilized to transform potential conflicts into opportunities for innovation and so improve team performance?
Yeah. So when there's diversity, let me put it this way. If there's only one input or one perspective being considered, versus diverse inputs. Wouldn't that be richer? Wouldn't that have more options, more solutions? Of course, there's more to deal with. It's never easy to, to analyze, to discuss, to go through all of this, to arrive at a creative, and to use creative approaches, problem solving, decision making methods, to arrive at the solution that everyone would buy into. But that is so much more richer, and of course that is so much more collaborative. At the end of the day, whatever strategy, whatever goal that we have, it is so difficult if we're the only one working to do that, right? To achieve that. We always need somebody else, a team, a whole department, the whole company, in fact, to achieve a goal. So we really need to work together with each other, and to manage ourselves first, our emotions, and to be learner, to be collaborative, so that we can we can be innovative, because that was a question, right? The diversity can lead to innovation.
Okay, thank you. So diversity, if used properly, can lead to innovation, and that doesn't mean that conflict is necessarily bad, right?
There's unity. There can be unity in diversity, as we say.
Okay,
Yeah.
unity in diversity. Okay, that's a nice tagline. And on that note, let me thank again Elaine for sharing her expertise with us on this webinar. Judging
Thank you.
by the comments, the takeaways, and the feedback that we're getting on the chat box, this has really been a well-appreciated webinar by our participants. And so I'd like to announce that our next webinar, it can be considered a fitting sequel to today's webinar. If we go back to the characters introduced by Elaine a while ago, we will be focusing on Alan in our next webinar. Although we may not be aware of it, Alan or we tell ourselves stories and make judgments in situations that we encounter. When we find ourselves in situations where the stakes are high and there are disagreements, our ability to take control of these stories significantly impact the outcome of these situations. So we invite you to join us again in our next webinar. This is going to be on September 10th. The stories we tell ourselves and how we can use this to achieve our goals. In this webinar, we will explore the nature of these stories and how this impact our emotions and behavior. So this is still going to be about emotional intelligence. Learn the different types of stories that our minds conjure up. And also learn how we can take control of these stories to achieve the results that we want. I will be the speaker for this webinar, so I hope to see you all again this coming webinar in September. Next, we have a public training, public workshop, which is face-to-face. This will happen in August. This is called Perfect Pitch. So equip yourself and your team with essential skills and insights needed to craft and deliver a persuasive, impactful, and effective message. This training is ideal for all leaders and managers, sales, marketing, and business development teams, and even individual contributors who are responsible for crafting and delivering presentations, whether it's in big or small group settings. It's also be helpful for those who are delivering those presentations in person or even online, or even delivering it verbally or in writing. So sign up now to this workshop, Pitch Perfect, defining your value proposition and delivering presentations that persuade. This is going to be on August 22. Don't miss out. There's a group discount that's available for those who register early. So we invite you to subscribe to POWERinU.com.ph to get updates on our upcoming learning events, complimentary webinars, online learning sessions, and face-to-face trainings. And on that note, thank you everyone for joining us in this webinar, and we hope to see you again in our other POWERinU learning events. Goodbye.